Pinkerton's Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children. This is Jim Donavan. The time is irrelevant, and I'm in an office in Santa Clarita. Control, I wasn't pleased when you insisted I came back early from my Vatican-mandated retreat in the woods. I expect you to deal with the trainees' issues, rather than force me to hold their hands. Eugene's a big boy, he can handle himself. Fortunately, I got to stay long enough to see the abbess safely to an emergency room. I've been told she was moved out of the ICU and into a less severe form of care. I don't know what hospitals call that, but I was relieved either way. I didn't expect the Paranormal Pinkertons to be able to afford an Uber all the way from Central California to LA, but I guess that speaks to how urgent this mission was. So I packed my backpack, putting the lizard that I had kind of abducted from the forest inside, and sat back and enjoyed the ride. Eugene started sending me texts, and he did not answer mine. Hey, that thing Jack killed? I'm here with the body. Control wants you to examine it. Hey, I'm starting to see some weird things. Was there anything in the storage unit that you had me go to? Hey, so, long story short, I think I'm gonna die. And then the text messages just stopped. Not a great sign. The lizard started shuffling around in the bag. I think I'm gonna call her Lizzie. I'm not great with naming things, plus when I was a kid, my best friend had an iguana named Lizzie. I unzipped the bag so she could pop her head out. When she crawled out and rested on my lap, the Uber driver saw her in his rearview mirror and said, "Hey, cool lizard! Hey, I got a bearded dragon, you know." And started incessantly yapping about his pet for the next 300 miles. I took a nap. When I woke up, he was still talking about his various pets, and we had just pulled up to the cold storage unit that I had rented up in Santa Clarita. It's a little out of the way, one of the northernmost cities in LA County. Pretty cool area, to be honest. I think I'm going to get a place out here, if I ever get out of my lease. I thanked the driver. I recommend a good tip, Control. His voice gave me some really restful sleep. No nightmares. 5 stars. It only took a moment to grab my gear from the suitcase. I loaded the Colt 1911 and slipped it into my back holster. I rolled the soulstone in my hands, feeling it and letting it warm to me. I didn't know what I'd face, but I wanted to be ready. The storage unit is in a pretty isolated part of town. It's not really creepy, it's just not heavily populated. Very quiet in all the right ways. And I love quiet. I heard some weird droning noise coming from the building. I knew it wasn't the air conditioning, and putting my fingers in my ears didn't stop the sound. Gun drawn, I dialed Eugene's number. It rang for a while and then went to voicemail. I hung up without leaving a message. This storage unit doesn't have a garage door setup like most. It's actually a very, very cold insulated room inside a mostly empty, single-story industrial building. I think there's a manager office for a construction company at the far side, but I pay a few extra $100 a month to just keep some empty spots between me and anyone else. The landlord was desperate, and back when I first found out my brother was a ghoul, I thought I might need to keep him in a refrigerated room, to prevent rot or whatever. Turns out, ghouls get a bit stronger in the cold, but I kept the room just in case. I opened the door leading inside. The droning got louder as I walked deeper into the building. The construction manager's office is positioned so that you have to walk past it to get to my unit. I peeked my head in and saw a woman on the floor in the corner of the room, hugging her knees, shoulders heaving in sobs. Another woman was slumped over at her desk. I went to check on her. She had slit her wrists with a letter opener. No pulse. Body was cold. I felt a slight stabbing pain in my temple as the droning noise started to cause a headache. The woman on the ground stopped crying and started groaning. I had heard that kind of groaning from people who just found out a loved one had died. Sometimes pain cannot be conveyed with tears. It needs a more visceral reaction. I went over to her, popped a squat, and tried to comfort her. She wouldn't respond. She didn't say anything. She just kept shaking, shivering, and moaning. Her eyes flickered oddly. They would roll up to the back of her head, but then rise from the bottom. The whites didn't roll enough for the eyes to turn all the way around, or circle around the parts of the eye socket covered in flesh. The iris was streaked with white lines. I stepped outside the office. This was too weird. I needed to call in the suicide, see if I could regroup outside away from the sound of that awful droning. The headache grew worse in the 2 minutes that I had been in the building. I had had worse migraines, but not many. I went toward the door leading outside, when all I saw was a blank wall. Where once there had been a door, now there was nothing. I walked over to it, rubbed my hand on the blank space where the door should have been, and even pounded the wall with my closed fist. Nothing out of the ordinary, beyond, the lack of the outside egress. Even the sound of me hitting the wall with my fist was accurate, as if the wall was actually made of cinder block and drywall. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The only way out was forward. The source was obvious to me. The body Jack had sent had to be causing some sort of psychic interference. I could tell from his report that it was capable of ripping apart and feeding on memories, but I had no idea what it was doing now that it was dead. Was the body rotting into psychic energy? Was it like smoke coming off of a fire? I needed to see it. The droning picked up an octave. It was no longer a low droning, but a higher pitch. The migraine at my right temple had migrated around to the other temple, feeling like an ice pick was being jabbed straight through my skull, really mixing the cortexes up into a wonderful new frontier of brain pain. I saw a burly man sprawled in the hallway. There was a massive gash in the drywall. Judging from the blood in the hole, as well as in his forehead, I surmised that he had tried to do some radical deconstruction with his head, and stopped when he passed out. He even shattered his hard hat. I checked his pulse. It was thready, but at least there was one. My own headache was making it harder to think, so rather than look for a first aid kit, I took my shirt off and formed a kind of loose bandage around his head to stop the bleeding. Pity I couldn't think of anything better. I liked that shirt. I continued down the hallway, tried not to feel guilty for the office workers. It wasn't my fault. I didn't know what this creature could do. I didn't know it could psychically bleed. I wouldn't feel guilty. I wouldn't feel guilty. It got colder as I got to the part of the building that I control. That wasn't right. I had it heavily insulated. There shouldn't have been any temperature change bleeding into the surrounding building. The drone continued to get louder. I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to it as quickly as I could, but I was a bit dizzy from the headache, and I stumbled and crashed into the wall. My gun experienced a negligent discharge as I clenched my fingers around the trigger in response to hitting the wall. The bullet smashed into the ceiling. Whatever I had seen, it ran off at the gunshot. I didn't get a good look at it, but it was definitely a human shape, and it turned the corner deeper into the building, turning right where my room should have been. I was about 20 feet away. I could not stand up straight, and I just kind of hugged the wall the whole way. I didn't want to holster my gun, but I was very much not reliable at the moment, with the droning affecting my balance and aim. I flicked the safety on with my thumb, but kept it at the ready just in case. I knew from listening to Jack's report that he had killed the creature with the very same type of gun that I currently wield, so I knew bullets could put it down, if it were still active. Maybe it went into a type of hibernation that made Jack think he killed it. I don't want to insult Jack's killer instinct, but I was shaken out of my contemplation by a bullet smashing through the wall I was walking next to. A line of 6 bullets followed, tracing a path along the hallway. After the first impact, I dropped prone, gun out in front of me, and popped one hand over my left ear to protect it from hearing loss. After 6 shots had been fired, I heard a light ringing in my ears, playing a perfect harmony with the droning, followed by some cursing. I suspected whoever had been firing was currently reloading. I took a chance and shouted out, "Hey, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm trying to figure out what's going on." I heard a painful sob, followed by a man shouting back, "How do I know that? How do I know you're not just one of them?" I hadn't seen a them yet, so I kept playing the hand I was dealt. "My name is Jim. I'm a detective. I don't know who they are." "Jim? Jim Donavan? Oh, thank God I'm saved." Sounded a little cliche to me, but Wasn't about to mock a man who might or might not have reloaded a pistol that was pointed roughly in my direction. Are you Eugene? Can I stand back up? Yeah, dude. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm really glad to see you here. Yeah, what happened? Okay, long story short, I'm in here with a body, and there are those things outside, and I think they want to eat me. Not in a good way. They got these teeth, Jim. First lesson for me, kid. Always give me specifics. What things? I think they're werewolves. They're big and hairy, and they're sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4. Also, can you hear that? What, the droning? Yeah, Eugene, it's really annoying. Hey, if I come in the door, will you shoot me? Okay, if you kill the werewolves first, I won't shoot you. Are you kidding me? I had just met this kid, and I was really starting to dislike him. Look, man, the werewolves outside are the real problem. I don't think an autopsy's going to matter much if they eat us. It was pretty obvious to me that there weren't any werewolves. The people in the management office would have been eaten. They wouldn't have killed themselves. Still, crazy man with a gun. Might as well not argue. Okay, Eugene, I'll find the werewolves for you. Hey, thanks, Jim. You're awesome. I hate newbies. Poor guy, this should have been a simple job. Instead, he's faced with some kind of memory involving werewolves. Or maybe a nightmare with them. Or his favorite horror movie. While I didn't think there were werewolves, there was something here. I had seen it bolt away from me out of the corner of my eye. I stalked down the hall, the same direction I saw the thing running. Yes, it would take me past the door, but I figured maybe I could sneak past it so that Eugene didn't freak out and try to shoot me again. I crept past. The door was shut, though I did notice a few bullet holes in the wall and the door. There was no body or blood, so whatever Eugene was spooked by hadn't been hit. He hadn't hit any innocents either. Small mercies. There wasn't much else in the building. One other empty office that I had rented out. If there was anything in this building, it was there. I crept up on the door. In my right hand, I held the door, while my left hand rested on the doorknob. I turned it and flung it open. I entered the room, sweeping my gun back and forth, like I had been trained to do during one weekend of playing paintball with the LAPD. Nothing. Suddenly, I felt a breath gently blow on my neck. I turned. Nothing. Then, a tongue licked my ear. I turned, and I saw standing there, looking like the cat that ate the canary. Marie, my old ex, whom I'd killed when she became a vampire, whom I had last seen in hell. Sorry, Control, I still haven't finished that report yet. I'll get on it right after this. She looked bad. Her skin was hanging off her bones in strips. I could see exposed muscle and sinew. Pieces of her face had fallen off, so that her skull was visible through her thinning hairline. Marie? What? You're dead. Well, you look dead. Why didn't you save me, Jim? She said. And then she let out the same scream she did when I killed her, and vanished in a puff of flame. I stumbled forward, hands outstretched to try to stop her from vanishing. And then I heard something behind me say my name. I saw some fat child. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him at first. He wore a yarmulke and a suit and a tie. It was the teenager from the Kabbalah Center. He said, "Why did you let her take me, Jim? Why are you keeping me imprisoned?" And then his eyes rolled to the back of his head, and he was drawn into the soul stone in my pocket, like water flowing into a drain. I felt the heat of flames at my back, and I turned and saw dozens of men and women in formal attire burst into flames, melting away under intense heat. Their voices screamed at me. "Why did you do it, Jim?" And then when they had all vanished, I saw Jane, standing before me in a peasant's white gown. She looked up at me with her big brown doe eyes and asked, "You saved me once, Jim. Where were you when I needed you again?" And then she started bleeding from the chest. As she sank down, her eyes never left mine. And as her eyes went vacant and empty, I was the last thing they saw. Whatever it was that had caused Eugene to freak out and see a werewolf, is causing me to see my own worst nightmares. I turned around to stumble back to the cold room with the body, and I came face to face with my brother, which, since we're twins, means I looked in a mirror. He didn't look gaunt and haggard like he does now in his ghoulish frame. He just looked healthy, standing there, looking immaculately dressed as he always did. Even had a little pocket square in his Italian suit. "Hey, Jimmy," he said. He wasn't real. I shot the illusion and ran past. He disappeared without a parting goodbye. I pounded on the door. "Eugene, I got the werewolf. Come on out and see it." He creaked the door open and stuck the gun out. "Where is he?" "He's around the corner. He's too big for me to lift." He looked askance and tiptoed out the door, gun held in his trembling hands. I hit him quite hard in the back of the head with my Colt. For his own safety, of course. I didn't need a crazy rookie with a gun making things difficult for me. He went down like a sack of potatoes. I picked up his gun and pocketed it, just in case. I hoped he'd just wake up with a headache. I went inside and saw the body. It was tall, skinnier than any man I'd ever seen. Long, thin arms brushed to the ground. I checked. It had 2 elbows, each segment longer than the last. Its hands were delicately thin. It had several open wounds on its chest where Jack had stabbed and shot it. Blue blood had congealed into a crust. The real shock, the creature had no face. None whatsoever, just an infinitely deep hole. I didn't dare touch it. I had a suspicion. Jack had said this was a creature that could manipulate and feed off memories. What I had seen confirmed his report. I pulled out the soul stone and focused, slipping between the threads of reality, and peered into the Verum Vicio. The world cleared up. The body was dead, but this was a creature of outre terre. Jack had killed the body, but he had left its mind alive. And it was poisoning and feeding off everyone around it with a sick miasma. Jack had broken the screen on the TV, but it would still turn on. This is what I mean when I say it looked alive. It's one of those weird facets of reality. Life and death carry an entirely different feel in the Vicio. They become almost tangible objects. Its body was dead, and it had already failed to stop me with its mind. It could not escape me as I held up the soul stone and looped strand after strand of invisible binding magic around its foul but immortal soul. When the flow of its soul into the stone stopped, the droning stopped. The troubles were over for tonight. I checked on Eugene. His breath was steady and he wasn't bleeding. Once again, small mercies. I went back toward the management office. The large man with the head wound was still alive, and my shirt had stopped the bleeding. The woman in the office had curled up around Lizzie and was sleeping peacefully. I didn't even realize my lizard had followed me in. I guess I need to pay more attention to her. She raised her head and waddled over to me. She nudged my foot until I picked her up. I brought us over to a chair, made a couple of phone calls, and started this recording. I'm not going to think about Lizzie right now. That is future Jim's problem. That guy is screwed. I could see the light of the ambulance. I'll finish up. Despite all this, I'm not going to study the corpse too deeply. It might draw something to it. It's too weird. The second I'm satisfied, I'm going to burn the body very carefully. I'll send you my notes on what I observed from it in the Verum Vicio. Control, not everything is good for my work. We'll need assistance to prevent this sort of thing from happening in the future. I guess this is probably as good as any project to start interviewing Gordon, pick his brain as it were. Until next time, this is Jim Donavan, over and out. Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ken Dickerson and performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Ken Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost. Email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com. Or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.